I'm Leroy Garcia from Blue Rain Gallery, the owner, CEO of Blue Rain Gallery. Welcome, Leroy.
Well, thank you, Mark. Pleasure being here.
You know, this is a lot easier, isn't it, than you getting on a plane, flying a non-direct flight to Tucson and doing the podcast, because that's what you were going to do.
Yeah, because I'm about the aesthetic.
Yeah, well, you got my aesthetics behind here.
You got mine behind here.
I love it. Is this in your house?
Yeah, they're in
Nice.
my home.
Yeah, who did the paintings behind you?
Those are by Aaron Courier.
Yeah, they're very cool. Yeah, those are nice. Yeah, perfect. Your head.
She's really blowing up, and the last show did very well. Of course, Tia Collection has a strong interest in her work at this point too.
So. Yeah, and tell me a little bit about her since you got the images there.
I started collecting her about 25 years ago. She started showing in a coffee shop in Taos. And I thought it was really unique because it was all collage. It was like, man, rappers from China and Taiwan and South America, Central America to create imagery that had social political dialogue to it. Since that point, she's really refined herself, and she's created such a beautiful body of work over those years. But I probably own about 30 major pieces of her.
Oh yeah, you're like me with Ed Mel.
Yeah.
One's not enough. You know, people don't get that, right? I mean, I've got artists who I have up to like 50 pieces of living artists and even more on deceased. And, you know, my clients often will say, well, I already have a piece. And I'm like, yeah, I got 40 of them. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, clearly you do the same thing, right? If you find somebody really like.
I like it, but I also follow the rules. You know, I don't like artists that are over prolific. Aaron maybe 20 pieces a year.
Oh wow.
She has a lot more drawings than that, but not like what you're looking at behind me.
So you don't like to handle an artist that does say 75 pieces in a year?
I do handle artists like that, and they don't follow the same rules for some reason. I can talk about Preston Singletary in that format, but glass art is a whole different enchilada than, say, paintings.
Yeah, but why is it that you don't want to handle somebody that produces a lot or are less likely to? It's not that you.
Well, I think it's more special when people are putting more effort into their work than just whipping it out. It also talks about more to the innovation part of the equation. When somebody's trying to be innovative, you can't just whip it out. Artists that are prolific usually whip out a formula, in a sense.
Oh, that's interesting. You see it that way. Yeah, I actually don't see it that way.
I know.
Yeah,
it's okay.
Well, I mean, it also, I think it might talk to how your artists and my artists are somewhat different, I think, in what we handle. And I don't think it really has anything to do with their prolific or not. But, you know, when I look at your artists, I do see a different stable of people that I assume really kind of comes from your tastes.
Oh, it totally does. I'm a very eclectic person. You come to the gallery, you see that right off the bat.
Yeah, I always like that about it.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I must admit. I love going to your gallery because there will be people I go, wow, don't know who that person is. Really interesting, unique. I like it a lot. Wonder where that came from.
Yeah, well, that's most of my artists, 90% of them for the most part, that are in a stable. I mean, because we handle collections, obviously, that don't follow its formats, but I always look for innovation, not imitation. And I like, you can look at landscape artists, there's millions of them. Most of them paint just like each other, but how are you going to paint the same landscape in a different way? So that's what I look for.
Yeah, you know, that's not unlike what I'm doing, but instead of saying innovation, I look for original voice.
Yeah,
that's what I'm looking for.
Same thing. Yes.
You know, and I think you kind of know it when you see it, whether it's a landscape painter or not. And you have landscape painters,
right?
And they have a unique voice. There's no doubt. So tell me a little bit. You know, I know a little bit of your backstory because I listen to your podcast. So let's talk about your podcast here, just so we let people know that you have your own podcast, which is the Blue Rain podcast.
Right.
And when does that? That's basically once a week.
No, it's when I feel like it.
I want to do that kind of podcast.
Yeah, I don't want to follow normal rules on that. Mostly I do my podcast for education reasons, for my artists. I've started interjecting collectors' viewpoints a little bit here and there, or people on the peripheral. Like I saw you interviewed Laura Finley Smith the other day. That's a peripheral person. Or if I invite the museum people in, but for the most part, it's artists and their perspective. And but we really came to that point of view because of the shutdown of the state when we went through COVID. We didn't have a lot of opportunities other than going to the virtual world to deal with this education format. The magazines were that's funny. Magazines lost their voice because they've been distributing through the galleries, but when the galleries are closed, how are you going to get your voice?
Yeah.
So that's why we ended up going that direction.
And how has that gone for you? What's been your experience on that?
It's been very successful. I don't know that I have the most listeners of all time, but the listeners I do are paying attention, and they're purchasing or commissioning works based off of my podcasts.
So you're ahead of me.
Well, I think maybe, I don't know, why do you do podcasts, on your end?
Well, the whole thing was this, really, it's the Art Dealer Diaries, the things that come through my life. So,
Right.
it's not artist-centric, though it seems to have kind of become that way.
Mhm.
The original idea really was, when I started it 5 years ago, is I wanted to capture the voices, honestly, of a bunch of the dealers that I didn't think were going to be around. And I
Right.
wanted to hear those stories because I think what we do is important. And especially in Native American art, and especially in antique Native American art, a lot of those dealers are, going every year. We have less of them. And it's a very interesting group and culture that is so interested in Native art. So that was really the reason to do it, was to capture. And then but the whole thing was always, the people that come through my life. So it could be something not even related to,
Right.
Western or Native
Well,
arts.
I have to say, I do like the parts, especially when you're talking about the art itself and educating people, like what is this type of pottery and blah blah, the weavings, and you're educating people, and that's so important. And I'm glad you've interviewed a lot of the older dealers, because they are passing. I live with this every day, maybe not with the dealers, because I never dealt with a lot of dealers other than my direct relationships with artists. But my collectors, when I started, I was 23. My average collector was late 50s. So imagine most of my major collectors have passed on for the same reasons. You just lose that knowledge. And
Yeah, it's an odd thing, isn't it? When you
yeah,
live long enough, I've been doing this is my 30th year in business, and yours is pretty close to the same, isn't it?
yeah, we're celebrating 30 years in February.
Yeah, I can remember when you actually opened. Um, yeah, and yeah, so we're on the same trajectory. You're just a little bit younger than me, I think.
Barely
Yeah.
catching up to you, Mark.
Yeah, we didn't catch up fast. So tell me, so like I was saying on your podcast, I've heard a little bit about your backstory, just from, because I do listen to your podcast. I enjoy them. But you grew up in Taos, right?
Yeah, that's my homeland. My family has been in northern New Mexico since the early 1500s. At least three of the four Spanish lines, anyways.
That's amazing. And you can
Hmm.
literally go back and
Fortunately, my mother, I was raised Mormon, and obviously Mormons are great genealogists, and so the genealogy is going back into Spain and beyond, back into the 1300s. So I do have a good grasp of that part of the family. I also have a good grasp on my mom's side, which is German and Welsh Irish too, which is, she's gone back about that far as well. But what interests me is the migration into northern New Mexico and why. And also the historic contributions of my family to the United States, as well as the Hispanic community and the Native community.
so what were those contributions?
So I have a very famous grandfather who heard me talk about, Bernardo Miera y Pacheco. He was commissioned by the King of Spain in the early part of the 1700s to come to New Mexico. I just did a podcast with Victor Gustavo Guler, who's one of the top santeros in our area. And he probably knows more about my grandpa, but my grandfather was a very polished artisan, but he was commissioned as an engineer. He came to New Mexico and made the first maps of the entire Southwest region, all the way up into Utah to California and down. He did the first maps of the Colorado, Rio Grande, did ethnological studies of all the tribes along the Rio Grande. And this is all around the 1700s. But you can find some of his screens and his santos or his retablos and bultos throughout northern New Mexico churches. And in fact, one of the largest screens that he made in 1750 is displayed at the Cristo del Rey Church at the top of Canyon Road here in Santa Fe. That's on the Hispanic side.
What's that like to go in and see something that was made by your direct relative and still is in function and use?
Well, that's an interesting question because, as I said, I was raised Mormon, and my grandfather obviously very, very staunch Catholic. And so coming to terms and having appreciation for what he did and his contributions as far as bringing that art form in a refined way to northern New Mexico was a big deal. But it takes studying and investigating. The State History Museum actually did a huge exhibit on him for a year and published a book on him. For those who want to see, you can go to the Museum Foundation of New Mexico or the State History Museum of New Mexico and buy one of those books.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So what your dad, was he from Taos as well?
Yeah, my dad, I was born in Taos. My dad was born in Taos. Some of the first families, the three lines came by the 1515s, 1520s to northern New Mexico into southern Colorado, San Luis Valley. And but you really have to ask the question why. And I didn't even ask the question. The question was asked of me when I did the LA art show about 8 years ago. This gentleman came up to me and noticed my name was Garcia and asked me about some of my lineage. And I was telling him about my familial names and about the times they came to the States. And 3 of those 4 lines were crypto Jews. And what's interesting too, if I went into my Spanish side, we're not even really Spanish. We're more French Jew than we are Spanish.
Have you done your 23andMe and seen what your...
I have done that too. Now that we're all exposed to China with that, but yeah, that was interesting. I didn't realize how much Native American blood I had in me, which is another story because how I got there, like I'm Native American, but I can't prove it because I had a grandmother who was Navajo in the mid to late 1800s who was tending sheep with her brother. This is a story from her that's been passed down. But they were kidnapped by Apaches and then brought and sold into adoption, we'll call it.
Yeah,
Spanish.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's how I got with my grandma. So it was always a story until, you do your DNA and you're like, wow, I'm 20+% Native American.
Yeah, well, that makes sense too, as far as the Navajo connection. There's a book out and you'll enjoy it because of your history by Matt Simmons, who just wrote about Bosque Redondo and the slave trade.
Oh yeah.
And very interesting, the whole slave trade.
Well, Blood and Thunder also was a good book that covered a lot of that.
Yeah, that was kind of more Kit Carson, but this was really just about Bosque Redondo, about the silversmith and the slave trade. And it was up to 20% of the Navajo Nation was at one time captives of slaves. And I'm not even talking about Bosque Redondo.
Right. It was before Redondo. Kit Carson was kind of at the last end. Well, the whole revolt area, that whole point was the territory was starting to be worried more and more about the Union coming in and stopping that trade. And that's led to that last revolt in a way.
Yeah, I mean, Kit Carson actually had slaves, and
yes,
when he used his Ute guides to help capture the Navajos and Canyon Jay, he actually wrote and said to his superiors, we should allow them to have slaves, the Utes, because that's how they want to get paid.
Yeah.
So I mean,
well, that was very common. A lot of people, we romanticize part of that native culture, but the natives in general, prior to even Spanish conquests were warring and doing all kinds of crazy things to each other.
Yeah.
And that's kind of sad, but nobody talks about it. But that's also an underlying truth.
Yeah. Well, this was probably your third great grandmother.
Yeah.
Yeah. There may be some, and you may have already looked into it, but some baptismal records, because they would always baptize
Well, what they did was, so they would sell them under auspice of adoption through the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church would just give you a baptismal record and give you your new parents.
right.
So it doesn't, when you look at the line itself, you would never know that grandma was a Navajo.
Yeah.
You would always assume she was Hispanic.
And what time would she have been around? Was this
1880s?
She was
1880s to 19. She died in what, 47 or 50, something like that.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
You definitely need to read Matt's book. You'll
I'll have to.
yeah, I mean, it's firsthand account from people that were at that time. And it
No.
literally just came out. You would find it fascinating. So your dad was from there. Your mom she was not from Taos?
No, my mom was born in Alabama. But she, like I say, she's German and Irish for the most part, or Welsh. My mom and dad met at BYU in the late 60s. And away from there they went. He dropped out of school, brought her back home to Taos, and got a job at the molybdenum mine in Cuesta.
Oh, wow.
And that's how he raised. And so I'm one of 11. I'm the second oldest. And this is a good fact. I always compliment my parents, but of the 11 children, all of us we're all college educated.
That's amazing, actually. Out of 11 children, that's impressive. Yep. That's really impressive.
I have a brother who's one of the top people in CDC, and their brothers who are doctors like UMDs, and it just is an amazing family. It's big, but good parenting.
And he worked he worked at the mine the whole time?
For 20 years, and they laid him off. You know, the mines in New Mexico have always been under duress economically. They finally decided to close the mine, so they laid everybody off. Then he ended up working in Los Alamos at the labs for 20 years as a planner. So he would do the engineering of buildings, construction or deconstruction.
Yeah, better job too, I would think.
Yeah, well, I don't know. He feels more exposed to some of the nuclear stuff, but yeah.
But he didn't move at that point. He didn't go, let's move up to Los Alamos.
He drove all those years, and I find myself doing the same thing. Uh-huh. You know, I live in Albuquerque, but I work in Santa Fe. Been 20 plus years of that.
Yeah, and why is that?
Schools.
Better schools.
Yeah, I could live in Santa Fe, but you know, we had 3 daughters, and I didn't want to drive all over Santa Fe looking for the best school. They're all over the place. I'd end up driving all day. So I found a place here in Albuquerque where I had the elementary, the middle school, and the high school within a 3-mile radius.
Yeah. And
they're top shelf in the state. So
yeah, so you did do just like your dad. Your dad probably didn't want to uproot you guys.
Right.
And you didn't want to uproot your family. So as you're growing up in Taos as a kid, were you interested in art at all? Were you making art or any of that interest?
No, I my parents, every now and then, my mom was a painter, and but just on the side. She's very good, actually. She could have been a professional, but every now and then they take us to the plaza and we'd look at some of the arts, but we always associated that as like for people that had money.
Right.
You know, we were very poor, so I didn't really surround myself with that.
Right. So, do you remember when you first, as a kid, started to notice art?
I really didn't pay attention to it, Mark, until I married or met Tammy. I was consumed in wanting to become a lawyer, and I was a pre-law major, political science major. And I remember losing complete interest in college and just consumed by art. I think I read every art book I could find for like 2 years straight.
Was that when you met Tammy? Is that when that?
I had just met Tammy, and I was helping her wholesale her pottery, and I saw this is frustrating, and I was like, I can do this better, and that all clicked in at the same time.
And you're still in college.
Yeah, I'm always in college, just
Yeah.
like you.
So you're in college, you meet who wasn't Tammy Garcia at that time, Tammy Kane, I
Right.
guess. And she's at that point, she's just an up and coming potter. She's nothing,
Oh, that's the problem. From what I saw, compared to how the dealers were cheating her.
yeah,
Because how I saw, I always do comparative analysis. I'm like, well, who else is doing designing like this? This is really unique.
right.
Maybe it's not refined yet, but the essence, the difference is there, the innovation is there, and so I saw that immediately. I could tell, I could see innovation immediately in any artist at that point, especially once you become educated in a medium, you know
Right.
what good stuff is.
And you're like 23 or so at this
I
time.
was 23.
And what year would have that been?
She was 1993 or so.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. So right then at that point, because I opened my gallery in 1992, and I kind of started doing the pottery stuff about 4 years before that. But in that time frame, you were still in college when you met her,
Yeah.
and then you immediately you just
About a year in, I took my last student loan and I used that funding to open up in my dad's house in El Prado in Taos,
Yeah.
which was a North Pueblo entrance to Taos Pueblo. It was 1,000 square foot room, which I grew up in, and it was vacated. So I'm like, hey, Dad, can I use this? I built some stairs up there, and away we went.
And were you married yet at this point? Did you?
Yeah. I was married in let's see, 1990.
Yeah. Okay. So you've been married for like
Yeah.
3 years to her.
About 3 years.
You see the quality she has, the artistic ability. Then you start really getting into Pueblo pottery probably at that point, and understanding how it's made, maybe going to the firings and different things, right?
Getting very immersed and involved.
Yeah.
I was Tammy's assistant for the first at least 10 years of our marriage. So I learned how to carve and do all that stuff.
Yeah.
Which set me up for all kinds of other things.
Yeah. So when you open that little space, and is it by the Taos Pueblo?
It's the north. It was at that point the North Pueblo entrance to the village. You could go by the Alsups,
Yeah.
which was the south entrance, and then you could go to the north, which is right. Our house was on the corner.
But it wasn't on Taos Pueblo land, was it?
No, it bordered it.
Perfect.
We shared the fence,
And that's where you grew up.
Yeah, and so a lot of my homies are from Taos Pueblo.
I'm sure a lot of them are. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you set this little gallery up and you start selling primarily Tammy's work, or did you
No,
add new?
I understood right off the bat I wasn't the caliber of a gallery to represent somebody like Tammy. When I first got really involved with Tammy, I realized that wholesaling her work was not the way to go,
Right.
and that for longevity's sakes, she needed to find galleries that would appreciate her and invest in her. And so I picked two. One was Andrews Pueblo Pottery, Robert Andrews over there.
Yep.
And then the other one was with Lee Cohen in Gallery 10.
Yep.
And so we put her in there, and I was happy to let that go while I was developing Blue Rain. Yeah, we didn't start representing Tammy until about 1997. Lee had passed away, and it's funny. I had an argument with Lee in 1995 about the internet, and I already had a difference of opinion going in a different direction of marketing right off the bat. So when he passed away, it was a short time after that we brought Tammy into Blue Rain, and that's when we really exploded.
Yeah. And so what does the name Blue Rain, or how did that come about?
Well, if you saw where Blue Rain started, there's a beautiful Taos mountain.
Right.
And at times when the rain clouds come over, that thing just turns blue and just the rain comes down. The other reason why is Mary Kane, the interpretation of her native name was Blue Rain, or one of her names was Blue Rain. So out of respect and honor for her, we did that.
Oh, that's very cool. That's interesting.
Mhm.
So so you opened Blue Rain in 19 95 as far as
93.
with Tammy though, I mean.
Oh, 90, 95, 96,
Yeah.
probably 96 would be my guess.
And so at that time frame, when she comes on board, you've been doing it for like 3 years now. Who all did you start to get to put in? Had you
Well, what
flat art
happened
yet,
in,
or was it just all?
well, I was a rinky dink man. I swear my average ticket item was about $200 at that point.
That was good.
Yeah.
Better than mine.
Well,
That
I
time.
think my first year I made like $15,000 in the total sales.
Wow.
So it was hard.
I understand.
But
I remember that.
yeah, it's just a struggle because I never had investors. I didn't come from money. I just built it slowly one day at a time. And so I only made 15,000 that year. So it gave me a line to go from there, trying harder and working. But I'll tell you, in 1995, Blue Rain got a break, and one of Tammy's clients and a good friend of ours decided to downsize. So they gave us a collection of pottery that was well over 500 pots, and they represented the best of everything. And it gave me the confidence all of a sudden to take market share of that particular medium. And when Lee passed on, that was kind of like the starting block for me. But it took that collection coming in to create that foundation.
Yeah, I remember when you came on the scene with that kind of thing, and because I knew Phil Cohen, and I actually spent one summer working in there, with my own gallery. He needed that, I guess the extra person to come in and bring more people to his gallery, and so
Phil had a lot of knowledge, and he knew where all the collections were that his father had built.
Yep. But I remember when you came onto the scene, and it felt like you came onto the scene. It felt like, okay, there's a new player that, and there was clearly. Did you feel like you were there? Did you have that, like, yeah, I'm coming, baby, look out?
Well, I honestly didn't realize what I had created. And in fact, it was around 2002, 2003, Tony Abeda and Tammy approached me because they had been talking on the side, and they wanted a bigger platform, and they demanded that I open up in Santa Fe. And I'm like, why? Everything's selling out here at Taos. Why do we need to go to Santa Fe?
Right.
And I didn't realize the difference until I got to Santa Fe, or what I had created for the first time. Like in Lee's case, he was pretty much a pottery gallery with a couple of kachinas and a Paul Plitka and a couple of weavings thrown in.
Right.
But Blue Rain had become a dynamic monster but I didn't even realize, because we were incorporated everything. It wasn't just a pottery gallery; it was a fine art gallery on the native spectrum. And so when we moved to Santa Fe, I remember that first Indian market. My gosh, we probably had about 15,000 people come in about 3 days.
Yeah.
And everything was red dotted. There was nothing left.
Yeah.
So yeah, it kind of caught me off guard.
And when did that happen? What year was that you came in?
Oh, that was around 2004, 2005.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I've been Santa Fe at that point for about 8 years, I guess. I think I opened there in 96 or something like that. Yeah. And I could see it too, it was like, okay, this is where you need to be for connections, at least at that point.
Bigger money, bigger collections, bigger everything.
Yeah, exposure.
Yeah.
And you were still in Taos though at that first part, right? You had both galleries.
Yeah.
Right?
I had both. I had two 10,000 square foot showrooms at one time.
Yeah.
And that was crazy. That was hard.
And so when did you decide to not have the Taos gallery anymore?
After the 15th year of Taos, I think by 17 years after Taos, we decided to go fully Santa Fe only.
Yeah. And then you had a gallery in Scottsdale for a while too, right?
Yeah, for 6 years. When I first came on the scene, Scottsdale in the wintertime was like Santa Fe in the summertime.
Yeah.
Very vibrant, galleries everywhere. You had Lavina Ole, you had Llewellyn, or Dean Horwich, you had Gallery 10. You had a myriad of galleries, and they were selling. It was a very happening place. Since that time to now, it's just, it's not what it was. And it's not that you can't exist there. It just takes a lot more work. I ended up closing because I went through divorce and pretty much had to take care of the girls, and I couldn't do everything. I couldn't manage the place and take them to school or do this or that. So I just chose to just close it down. We're thinking about reopening up, but because I'm in a better place, all my girls are grown up now and left the house. So
Plus, you probably would like a nice winter in
and
Scottsdale versus.
that's exactly.
You know, I can speak to it because I did, Santa Fe and Tucson for 20 years. And it takes a lot out of you. You just don't get downtime.
No, you don't. You're always driving, or man, it's a lot of work. It is.
Yeah. I mean, I know from, right now, I know what you're going through. I'm surprised you have time to even do this. You probably don't actually have time to do this.
Sometimes I don't. That's why I'm like, I do them when I do them. There is so much. Blue Rain is still on a growth curve. Like it's crazy. I can't even explain it. But we grew about 25% over our best year ever last year, and this year's numbers are beating last year's numbers. So we're on a heavy growth cycle.
What do you attribute that to?
Corona. Most people in our age demographic on up stayed home. We didn't go out to eat. We didn't travel. So we just stayed home and got wealthier because our checks kept coming in. And so when our governor decided to let go of the restrictions for travel into the state, it was just an explosion.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you felt that in Arizona because you weren't to shut down as much, but when that floodgate was lifted, oh my gosh, and it hasn't stopped.
Yeah. Do you, it's interesting. At that time, though, when it first shut down, I mean, you lost an Indian market, completely lost one. And I remember thinking very much like, oh, wow, if I was in one of these galleries position, I don't have Indian market, what the hell am I going to do?
Especially with high rent.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, that had to be daunting and scary and everything.
It was scary, but you know what I did? I was one of the few galleries in the state that I never closed. So Blue Rain had an Indian market without Indian market having Indian market, and it was still successful.
Yeah.
And we decided not to let the virus take us down, and we're going to fight through it and keep on surviving. And my staff bought into that too because they understood it pertained to their livelihood as well.
Yeah. So
everybody bought in. We worked harder. I think we were averaging 12-hour days during that time. Everybody in the staff. And boy, it really paid. When the floodgates were open, we were already ready. It's not like we're trying to get ready.
Right.
we were just ahead of the curve again for that process.
Yeah, and you did some other things, I think, right? You started your podcast for one thing, right?
Well, the podcast helped, and then we opened up Blue Rain Print Shop.
Yeah, talk to me about that. It's an interesting thing. How is
well, it's something that because I was thinking about, especially our younger up and coming artists who are 1 foot in a career of art and another foot trying to survive by having a job to pay bills. And I wasn't sure how long this was going to last. It was supposed to be 2 weeks. Remember, we just need 2 weeks. It turned into almost 2 years. And so I had in 2001 opened a website, bluerainprintshop.com, and what we were doing was just replicating, making prints of originals. The problem was that people were buying the prints and they stopped buying the originals. So
right.
I shut that one down. But so I'm sitting there in the middle of COVID, and a lawsuit had finished in my head, and I was able to think. And I was sitting down. I'm like, you know what? That .com is about to expire. What do I do with it? And so I'm like, well, let me rethink this. And all these artists, they hold on to their copyrights like there's no tomorrow. That's the most precious thing to them. Yet they don't do nothing with them until they're dead, and then they wait for their heritage to figure it out. And I was like, why not figure out something to do now while you're alive?
Right.
And so we created Blue Rain Print Shop to put their imagery on anything you can think of, any type of product from A to Z. And that really helped, especially the younger artists, because it didn't give them a lot of money, but like $200 or $300 extra a month. That was something. It was better than nothing.
Yeah. Do you worry that it overexposes their art in a different form or fashion that takes?
Well, Well, that's a hesitation on some artists, and I understand why, because they think it's going to undervalue. Uh, but when it comes to marketing, it's cross marketing, and it's benefited everybody. Sales on all those artists that have participated in the print shop have gone up exponentially, not down.
Mm. And so for you, really, I mean, having this, it's more about getting your artist brand out there and exposure than it is actually the sales. I mean, because for you to
Correct.
sell a cup or a piece of luggage or whatever it is, that's in a way just kind of a pain in the ass, I would think.
Yeah, well, I create it where it's not a pain in the ass, but right economically, as you're describing it, would be because it's not worth the time,
Right.
but it is. And the only thing I'll tell you is like when I started my gallery in Taos, like I told you, my average ticket item was $200 or $300. I had collectors that I hadn't seen that had bought stuff from me back then, and then show up 20 years later and like, hey, can I see that Tony Day turtle? I'm like, I haven't seen you. The last thing you bought was $300. This is
Right.
$150,000 piece. He's like, well, I'd like to see it. And I'm like, okay, pull it out. And he writes me a check. So you can't underappreciate the value of farming. You got to lay your seeds for the future. And what better way than to get people involved in art in a very economic way in the beginning, because they will aspire to get an original as they grow up the economic ladder.
So you use it as an entry point for a lot of people.
Yes, it's very important. Yeah.
I guess I kind of do the same, but not with the way you do it, because we handle things that I've never been a person that said, well, I'm not going to handle that because it's $100. I have lots of pieces of, I just bought a ring for $20,
Right.
And, I'm going to sell it for $40. And
right.
Is that good? Probably not. Probably lose money, but I'm pretty sure I'll lose money actually. But it does get people the ability to associate with the gallery, to have something to start. And you're right, they can go from a $300 pot to $150,000, Tony Day turtle.
Yeah, and I have plenty of examples of that. I have another collector I hadn't seen for 20 years. And in that 20 years, he became a billionaire, from a thousandaire to a billionaire.
Yeah.
And has spent, millions of dollars on us.
Yeah.
So you can't discount the beginning of a journey.
Yeah. Well, and that's also you being there, longevity and having ethics and, doing your job and all that, because he could have broken off and gone different ways all along. But, if you think about it, you're growing the same way as he is. Maybe not thousandaire to billionaire, but it's still from a little shop in Taos, one-room shop, to one of the leaders in the field.
Well, as impressed as I am of their growth, they are impressed by Blue Rain Gallery's growth. Yes.
I believe that. Yeah. I mean, you're a brand, you're a national, international brand. That's no doubt about it. So how do you see that changing? I mean, you and I have both done this now for 30 years. How do you see your business changing at Blue Rain over the next 5 years, let's just say?
It would be easier to deal with deceased artists at this point because the dynamic of the market has changed so much into the social world, to where if you don't deal with artists that are ethical or see a long-term picture, it's hard to deal with them, because social media provides direct format or direct contact. So unless you have arrangements that are appreciated and honored, you're going to be battling uphill. And it's changed that way. So the artists that Blue Rain has, we're very hardcore with. That ethical part is very, very important. I still don't have contracts. I'm old school. I do a shake by the hand. But if you can't live by the agreement, then the arrangement is going to be short-lived.
Yeah. So the problem, we don't have contracts either, and never have, and it's the same kind of thing. I figure if they're not happy, then they should leave, and if I'm not happy, then I should leave. And so, but the problem is that from a gallery's point of view, and I have the same thing, is that you're competing with their own Instagram, Facebook, social media, plus I would assume the different museum shows that go on too, right?
Well, I'll give you an example. We had a famous artist, we will not talk about names, but we'd spend 50 to 60,000 a year in advertising. the last show we got was all wet, nothing signed. It was probably about a third the size of what we normally get. But turns out there was a direct flow out of the studio. you know,
Right.
Blue Rain's advertising this name
Right.
over and over for years, and elevate. And yes, the artist is innovative. But when those ethics go downhill, what's the point? It's just dysfunctional.
So how do you deal with that? What do you do in the future with that?
You-
Because it's only
well,
gets more,
I,
right?
I won't deal with people like that. And well, think about it. Young artists come to me all the time, and they're like, "Oh, I want to be like Tammy. I want to be like Preston Singletary, or I want to be like Tony Aveda." I'm like, "Well, you want to be like them, but you don't want to play by the same rules." Tony Aveda hadn't shown an indie market for the last 28 years. It's just been gallery representation. Tammy, for the most part, until she decided to go back to market, I don't think that's been the best move for her. Preston has never gone through indie market. They're just gallerists. And in Preston's case, especially, he's been one of the most ethical people and honored that gallery relationship. And so it can be done. And look what's happened to that guy. He's become a mega $1 million artist, a force to be dealt with.
Yeah.
To get a huge exhibit at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. for a year, 10,000 square feet, that says a lot. But he got there by living ethically and morally. And that's how we live.
Yeah. So as I read you, it sounds like things will continue kind of the same way you're doing, but you just have to be very careful on who you select as an artist.
Yeah, because we're when we deal with artists, we don't tell them, hey, you can't have social media. We're saying, work with us so that we feel comfortable investing in you.
Yeah.
And it's reciprocated two-way. It's a two-way street. It's not one way. But they need that exposure. They need my contacts. They need my museum contacts. I think if you ask Preston Singletary how many museums we've got him in, he probably couldn't even give you the list. It's too big. But that goes for a lot of artists.
And how do you develop those kind of museum contacts?
Over 30 years.
Yeah,
Same way you.
It's same thing. I mean, I'm just curious to hear how you do it.
It's just, I've gotten to know most of the directors of, especially all the Western Heritage stuff, which you're familiar with, from Seth Hopkins to the Heard Museum director, David, and Denver. We know all these people, Ludovic. Just when you meet them, you start talking, you have similar things. They come to the gallery, actually. They come to me and start talking to me and picking my brain. And before I know it, we have a pretty good relationship.
Well, you're a tastemaker too, right? I mean, you have a beat of what's going on in the world with
I try to, yeah.
I think so. And not only, more specifically, I would even say to Indigenous and Hispanic artists as well. I don't know if you feel that's true or not, but it seems like that's true.
I've always had a love for both of those communities. The Hispanic devotional is something recently that we've been dabbling in, but I want to be more serious about it. But I run into the same problem I do with the Native community, and there is this anti-gallery context that flows in an undercurrent, and part of that's just like, well, I don't want to share my profit, but at the same time, they want to be famous. Okay, well, we know how to do this. If you'll follow these rules, we can help you get there. But I have the same hopes for the Hispanic devotional arts, that we can help eventually elevate them. But it's going to take a group of them to get together and start understanding those principles.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
Mm-hmm.
That latter one, because I kind of tried to do that myself, and it's a niche community at that point,
Oh, it's a very hardcore niche community.
Yeah. I mean, you have the culture, your own culture to go with it, which helps.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it just takes somebody who believes in it.
Yep.
Wants to throw the money at it and the time and the energy and the space.
And we have thrown a lot of money.
I'm sure you have.
Well, we at one point we're taking out all the back covers of every magazine in the industry. That's kind of slowed down because the magazine industry has suffered like the galleries. They don't understand, but we're in the same boat in a way.
Yeah.
But things are changing because of social medias and technologies. And if you don't adapt, you're going to fall behind.
Well, I think if you look at the magazines now, it used to be all galleries, and now it's more like all auction houses, artists doing their own, advertising, and then some galleries that just have always been there, like you and me and some others. I mean, don't you think that's true?
Well, the biggest thing that has changed about magazines, and you can think about this because you started the same as I did. 30 years ago, a magazine would come in to ask for your business, and they would show you an audited accounting of subscribers and amount published. And now try to do that because I don't think it exists. And their distribution is fake because they're just doing it through mostly the galleries, not necessarily on the stands, because people are not as tactile. They're going through their phones.
Yeah.
Or their computers, and they're not as tactile as they used to be. So there's some legitimacy lost there as well, because when these magazines who are on the border of flailing, they're basically doing editorial based on advertorial, not editorial. It's not even legitimate anymore. It's hard to get legitimate editorial, but that's also what's brought on these podcasts from your end and my end, because that's more legitimate editorial, even it's dialogue. But it's legitimate dialogue.
Yeah, it is.
It's not paid.
Yeah, it's different, and it's more in depth for sure.
Yeah.
As long as people will take the time to listen to it. So,
Correct.
and they do and they don't, but
Yeah.
it's interesting. I don't use mine as it's not something I do as a brand enhancement, whether it is or not. It's just, I actually just enjoy doing it.
Mhm.
And I think I'm leaving something there for, my
Well, Mark,
legacy.
I think you're a lot like me. You have a lot of history, a lot of knowledge in these fields, and it's important to get that information out. People appreciate it, and some of them aren't going to listen for an hour or 2 hours, but they'll pay attention for their segmented time, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But it's important that we have to get the messaging out. If you don't, you can't hope for a magazine to come to you and then they're going to hit you up for paying $2,000 for an ad, and then the words are just, I don't know, they're mimicked from article to article.
Right.
It's just not as legitimate as it used to be.
It's different for sure. So
Mhm.
what do you have? Because this will actually come out this next week, this podcast. So tell me what you have going on in the gallery right now and through Indian markets. So if people are going to Santa Fe, that they can.
Well, this Friday we're opening up a show for Dennis Saminsky and Billy Shank.
So that's
who,
two people we both represent, and
and they're good people, and that's the right reason. they're fantastic. They're innovative in their own ways. That Billy, I just have a lot of respect for him and his. We'll talk about knowledge and fields, man. That guy is
he's interesting, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, and Dennis too. Dennis comes more off the commercial end of life, but he's very talented.
And is it going on at the same time, the show?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Well, it's fun because I know that, especially for Billy, he actually collects Dennis's work himself.
Yes.
So that's
well, actually, Dennis is staying at his house, so he didn't. Dennis doesn't have to have a hotel; he just stays at Billy.
And then, so what do you have coming up the following for Indian Market? Do you have
for Indian Market? We have obviously the lineups of Preston Singletary, Jody Naranjo, Harlan Riano. We also have up and comers like Ryan Singer, Navajo.
I love that guy's stuff.
Oh yeah, I am dying to get more and more. He's trying to finish up his master's degree, and so we just have to be a little patient and let him finish some of that stuff.
I actually got to tell you, I wanted to call him and see if he wanted to show, but I didn't want to step on anybody's footsteps, which I know are your footsteps.
No, it's just hard to get work out because these guys are limited, and he goes to school, so there's not that many paintings to fight over.
Yeah.
And sometimes I see a painting, I just stash it in my collection because that's just good.
Like it stuff.
And then Chris Papan and Star Hardridge. We have a young glass artist, but he's not that young anymore. He's been at it for a long time. But Preston Singletary's been working with another Tlingit glassblower in Raven Sky River, and that's some beautiful work. Raven is a master glassblower. I mean, he was the tail end of the William Morris team, but he's a master of marine life in glass. Now you add Preston Singletary imagery to that, it's just mind blowing.
And that'll
pretty-
be the show at Indian Market, those two together collaborate.
Yeah, and then Dan Friday, and then we'll have glass demonstrations with Preston and Dan. What is I'm going to talk to my producer. What is that? Oh yeah, so Dan Friday just coming off the series Blown Away. I don't know if you've seen that. What is it on? Netflix. It's on Netflix.
What is it?
And
I don't know.
well, it's a series of challenges, kind of like what was that show? Project Runway, like Pat Michaels was
Oh, I
on.
know which one it is. I have seen it. It was very interesting.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
He was on
And
that.
Yeah, Dan Friday was featured. He's one of our top class artists.
Oh, that's interesting.
And yeah, so I'm excited to see, and people can come and see him blow. He's a very humble man. Been blowing glass for Del Chihuly for about 20 years, I think, at least.
How, I've always wondered I don't really deal in glass. And one of the reasons is just shipping. I mean, you've got to have breakage. It has to happen.
You know what, Mark? We cracked $150,000 piece about 6 months ago.
Yeah. I mean, you can do the best job you can do in the world, and it's still, you can have these.
You just have to be very procedural. I'm not afraid of glass. Some of the stuff I ship, you'd freak out on. I mean, Kachina dolls have taught me how to ship.
Yeah.
But
you know what Kachina dolls have taught me? Not to deal in Kachina dolls.
Yeah, I've been trying not to go with Kachina dolls, but because I have such a history, they keep coming to me.
Well, what I do is I still deal in them, but I actually say, if I ship them and they break, I'm not responsible. We recommend you picking them up.
Yeah, and the other thing you can tell about Kachina dolls and collectors is breakage is part of the ownership, and it does not devalue the piece.
Yeah, I agree.
So
yeah,
just get past that bump and you're okay. But we have a good record for the most part of shipping the most craziest dolls you could think of. But so glass, as fragile as that can get, yeah, we're good at packing that.
Yeah, but even being great at it, sometimes it's.
No, we still make mistakes, and every now and then we just everything is procedural. If you follow the right procedures and you put those in place and you honor those procedures, usually you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
If you take shortcuts or you're fast, you're asking for problems.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can happen around Indian Market when you've sold 20 objects and you need to get them out and everybody's calling and wants them out. And it can happen.
Well, believe it or not, I still do most of the shipping myself. I mean, I have people that will help me, but after Indian Market, I'm like, everybody get out of my way.
That's so
get this packed and get it out.
Yeah. Well, I have the same person who's worked for me for over 20 years. So
they're good at it.
I get out of his way. They know not to have me do any packing. It's a big mistake on that end. So anything else that you want to talk about or say before we kind of wrap it up? And
no, I want to tell you how much I appreciate you and care for what you're doing and love what you've done. And thank you for doing that for our art community and your love for the Native American community. And it's wonderful to talk to somebody who has a shared conviction in that direction. And Maynard Dixon, going back to BYU, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All those paintings that were in there. Yeah, he sold them in 1937 for $3,700, 85 pieces. There's a couple of them that are worth over $1.5 million alone.
Oh, at least.
Did you get to see those growing up when you were in BYU? Were you interested in any of that?
I heard about the BYU art school and there's some students they're coming out of there. So I went to go see some, which is Sean Dideker and Ben McPherson and Justin Taylor. And when I went to go see their exhibit, I ended up having the opportunity to see some of the collection of the Maynard Dixons. I was shocked. And it was at that time I learned that was the largest Maynard Dixon collection.
Yeah.
Which shocked me. I did not realize that.
Oh yeah, that's an homage. I think Dixon just wanted wasn't as much as a money thing, even though 37 clearly was, just
preservation.
Yeah, they were coming out of the, depression, but he wanted his stuff to be somewhere, right? And he liked the Mormon community. He liked them.
It was he found a place that would preserve his heritage and his legacy. right? And I think, and I when we're talking like Aaron Courier and Tia collection, I see the same type of relationship that maybe Maynard saw with BYU, that we see with Tia collection, because you get in that, it's always on loan
Yeah,
to museums throughout the world. It's a beautiful thing.
yeah, no, it's an amazing, uh, that organization that they've done is just crazy. Yeah,
No, Laura is redirected, and of course I can't talk about who the Tia collection guys, but they're a great team, and I like that he brought her in, and she reformatted and redirected
yeah,
in a good way.
yeah, no, I mean, it's an amazing collection, and I'm sure you can almost find anywhere in somewhere in America, one of the, their collection is being loaned and given out.
Yes, yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Wonderful. Well, Leroy, thank you so much. Yes, I've always felt you and I were kind of kindred spirits, that we had kind of a similar path and trajectory and saw the world kind of the same way. And, and it's fun to be able to actually get to take the time to talk to you. And I
I
enjoyed
know
it.
we could talk like this without this, but
Yeah,
so
we'll do
everybody
it.
enjoyed this in a natural state.
Yeah, well, the next time you come down to Tucson, we can do that. Or I go up
Oh
to
yeah,
Santa Fe.
you can
So
always come to Santa Fe, and we can hang out. And
yeah, no, I think we'd have I'm surprised we haven't done something together, actually, co-branded
it's
something.
because as dealers, we live in a box,
Yeah,
and getting out of our box is hard.
that's true.
Mhm.
Yeah. I've talked to more dealers through my podcast than people that I've known for, 30 years. Yeah, like this. I mean, we've never sat down and talked for an hour. We've,
Right.
talk on the phone and we talk here and there, but I'm usually, when I call you, it's a business related,
Yeah.
usually me
Yeah.
asking you a question. What do you think? What is this?
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Well, thank you, Mark. Again, you're a very kind person.
Thank you. It was lovely having you on. Please listen to Blue Rain podcast too. It's interesting. There are a few artists there I may have to re-interview because I just find them so interesting. It's one of the few podcasts I actually do listen to a lot, because I
Yeah.
find the artists on there to be unique individuals. So, and this, it's the stories, right? So
Yeah, it is.
we'll add this story to it. Thank you again. I won't be in Indian Market this year. Unfortunately, I am giving a lecture on Maynard Dixon at the Russell Museum.
Surprise.
So
I saw that. I saw that in the catalog. That's
yeah,
nice.
I have to be there. So
Well, good luck with that.
yeah, it's the first one I've missed in like over 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a heartbreaker. I even went to Indian Market in 2020, even though there wasn't an Indian Market. It was just a seat. It was weird. There was just no,
It was nothing there.
yeah, it was so odd
Yeah.
walking on, an Indian Market weekend and being
It
downtown.
was a ghost town.
It was a ghost town. It was
Yeah.
very odd, but this year it's going to be an absolute
It's
blowout.
gonna be crazy. It's
Yeah.
gonna be great. We're ready. Bring it on.
I know you'll handle it. I will not have to deal with that. So,
Yeah.
right.
Smart.
Well, Leroy Garcia, Blue Rain Gallery, thank you so much. And
Thank you, Mark.
we'll talk soon.
All right. Later, brother.
All right. Bye-bye.